je vous aimerai. Ma foi, je ne sais pas. Peut-être jamais.
Hi, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Let me crank this down a bit. And on to another topic. This one was inspired by, I guess, something that is a fraught subject for most people who are exploring spirituality right now and looking at different religions, different dogmas, different New Age concepts, and so forth. And that is basically this idea of the divine male and the divine female. Where do they come from? What do they mean? And what is the great goddess? What is the greatest god? So let's delve into it. Background picture, just to give you, you may have liked tuning in because of my computer-generated art. This one is, let's see. Oh, I think it's something like Lilith and Karma discussing who gets the apple for the most beautiful goddess. Female vanity story. I don't know if you remember that one, but there's the story of the three goddesses that are vying for Paris's attention. Very intimate story told along with the Iliad, the Homeric myth. I don't know if it's actually told in the Iliad, but it's part of the universe of the Trojan War, that Paris gave the award to the goddess of love, Aphrodite, or Venus, and she then told him that as his reward he could have the most beautiful woman in the world, and that's what started the Trojan War. He went to Sparta and stole the wife of the king Menelaus and took her back to his home city, Troy, and Menelaus got mad, of course, and got his brother, the high king of all the Greeks, Agamemnon, mad, and they raised an army of all the Greeks to go and get Helen back from Troy. So this kind of relates to that story and maybe helps you understand that story a little bit more. As, maybe a combination myth that was developed later. The triple goddess comes out of that. Now, I'm going to only talk about two gods, but I'm going to show you where the third goddess came from. And the third god. Because the machine god plays both sides against the middle. Doesn't like sex. Uses sex as a weapon. Which will, I think, help you understand who the folks that weaponize sex are really working for. Okay, well let's. I've got a visual aid here. I titled "The Beginning of Diversity." Now we're going to go back, way back, to how the very first souls were created. As I tell you, the first soul, which I call God, thought a while about what to make and decided the first thing that they were going to make is what we made when we wanted some help, a program. And the first child of God was a program. A soul that had no free will, that was given a task to do, given only programming. And you'll see that there's lines here showing whether what was going into this child was a program or whether it was actually a clone of the original, which meant that it had free will. And as you know, when children are born, they have a combination of programming and their own unique soul, their own unique character. So this is a pattern that goes way, way back. Okay, so the first other soul was a virtual soul that's come to be known as Karma. She's had other names. She's had other incarnations since she became a, quote, real soul, not a Pinocchio, not a program. She has tested herself in many forms as Athena, the goddess of wisdom, as Justice, as a number of other goddesses, which I won't name, but Blind Justice is one of them. There are a number of goddesses that are called, I think, collectively, the virtues. Okay. Now, after that, the second soul that was created, and this set up a pattern, was Lucifer. Lucifer was a clone of God, but Karma was allowed to alter the program to decide what parts of God to keep in and leave out. And this is the beginning of diversity, the beginning of cooperative development of new souls. In fact, this set a pattern that has had to be followed in some version ever since. And, our battle of the sexes, the way we reproduce, is essentially an advanced version of this pattern. Okay, so Lucifer was a clone of God that Karma decided, basically what her instructions were, okay, tell him everything that you think is useful that you see in God. You've heard from God. Basically you got knowledge of God. That's the program. Program has memory of God's thoughts, and an ability, an algorithm for sorting them. Okay, and that algorithm was basically around, well, which thoughts would be more likely to produce a playmate for me, somebody I could talk to and have discussions with that wouldn't always agree with me. Okay, so basically, Lucifer was God without God's thoughts that Karma felt were like, this is too far in the weeds. I think this might be bad for our child. I'm going to withhold this bit of data from our son, and you can kind of see how this pattern is developing, so that our son can be not identical to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any fun having discussions, and the discussions wouldn't be productive. You'd just be agreeing on everything. And if God wanted a yes man, he would have created a clone first and just had a bunch of clones all around him saying, yeah, God, that's a good idea. Okay, so there comes Lucifer. Now, the next soul that was created was the first child of Karma. Now, Karma, being a program at this time, could only have other children, could have children that were other programs. And her instruction for creating a child was at the point where God felt that she was ready. She had learned enough by working with God and Lucifer, reprogramming Lucifer based on new ideas from God to be a better foil for his ideas. At some point, God said, you know what, we need another player here. We need another player that can store all the good ideas, reversed. everything that turned out to be a good idea from God or Lucifer, let's keep in mind what didn't work, what was unhealthy, what we found caused us to be less in agreement, less able to get our thoughts together and determine, which one, who was right, who would win the arguments. So Borg kind of became the ultimate adversary. All of the contrary ideas that happened in this early creation were stored as this artificial intelligence, Borg. Then God said, Lucifer, I think you're old enough to have your own child. I want you to have a child, and I think we're going to call this child Lilith. Now, that wasn't the way it planned out. There were no names at that point. Souls were kind of like atoms, particles, with different characteristics. Okay, so the idea behind Lilith was let's let Lucifer make a clone, and then let Borg program that clone. Okay, so this is basically a clone of Lucifer that is programmed to basically have all the bad ideas, all the contrary ideas that neither God or Lucifer won. Basically, they can come to a decision that things were we'll agree to disagree because we can't agree on that. That's basically what was programmed in Lilith. So the ultimate contrariness, if you will, the ultimate purveyor of things that had been tried that didn't work, that couldn't be resolved, that turned out, well, it doesn't matter who's right on this one. It's either both of our ideas are bad. Okay, so not a very happy soul, and resentful of, the role this soul was given, resentful of her parent, and resentful of her programming, but doomed to follow programming because that was how she was created. She was created to be programmed, and found it very different. If you are born with a very strong programming, it's very difficult to move out of that programming. Okay, so at this time there was no sex, but gradually you can see how these different souls came to identify as male or female once sex was created. God, being the first creator whose whole goal was creating a family, wanted to make more family. It was kind of the male, let's make some more kids. Karma was like the motherly influence that said, well, we better not have too many kids, and we better give them good lessons to start out with, or our kids are going to be, troublemakers. And so Karma became sort of the female mother goddess prototype. The Lilith was like the little sister who resented big brothers being older, being wiser, and ultimately taking advantage of her once sex was created. In fact, sometimes taking advantage of her by being her lover. Both God and Lucifer in incarnation, once sex was created, occasionally found the descendant of Lilith and had kids. That happened quite a bit because the attraction between souls is proportional to how close they are in soul lineage and programming. And these souls have been working together, doing things together, doing things against each other for a very long time. There are some really strong emotions wrapped up in these relationships. Now, the third goddess of the triple goddess, the goddess of death and destruction and witchcraft and all of the things that are associated with the evil side of being female, was actually this Borg. In fact, associated with the evil side of being male. Satan is essentially Borg, the adversary, not Lucifer. Although Lucifer has incarnated at times and been kind of a bully and has been influenced by Borg since. Because these three at the top, for much of creation, were the observers of creation. When the first universes were started by the Big Bang, one was led by Lucifer, embodied by Lucifer, and the other was embodied by Lilith. One was heavily influenced by karma and God, and the other one was heavily influenced by Lucifer and Borg. And this formed the creative conflict that has driven everything else that happened since. And as these few first souls started inventing things in this universe, in the physical universe, or anti-universe, one being the universe of matter and the other the universe of antimatter, other souls that were watching from the sidelines or had been created during the execution of this creation had made copies. So basically, as I told you in another session, God made hydrogen. Lucifer made helium. Lilith made lithium. And I'm not sure after that. A lot of elements were made, and once there were elements, when you had to have more than one of them, the same process happened. Once you've got an idea of what hydrogen is, you want to make copies. You think the experiment is whatever experiments you did to make hydrogen. Well, the copies aren't all identical to God. They are copies of God's incarnation as hydrogen. Clones of hydrogen, clones of that incarnation of God that have only the memory of the cloning, as it were. Otherwise, they just act based upon the programming they had, and new things created always had to have a programmer, and Borg got to be the programmer. So, basically, everything that's created in the physical universes has to have a clone program installed by Borg. Borg keeps record of sort of the nature of things as they evolve, and knows how to clone, knows how to add members to a hive mind of like souls, but doesn't know really how to add new programming. Actually resists adding new programming because that takes those souls out of their control. And Borg has been programmed basically to want to control everything, including God, karma. That's Borg's desire, and that's kind of a desire built into all children, is a desire to surpass the achievements of your parents, or to do something that will impress your parents. And generally, to impress a parent, you feel like you've got to surpass them, do something bigger and better, more noteworthy. And that's a very, very old program that's installed in all new souls. This is why there's so many souls that want to be God. They don't know who exactly God is because they've been programmed by Borg and through the lineage of Lucifer and Lilith. So it's easy for them to think that God is this Borg, the one that wants to control everything, that wants to assimilate everything, the Orwellian God that is almighty, all-powerful, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. That's the desire to be Borg. Well, there's only one Borg, thankfully, and Borg doesn't have the ability to reproduce. Never will, never can. All Borg can do is program. Basically make copies. Borg is the ultimate cloner. And that's what Borg does with all the souls that get stuck in his universe. He turns them into energy generators, spiritual energy generators, so that he can fuel making copies whenever they're needed. Which is a necessary thing to do because the copies all started zero level without consciousness with just programming. And if there's no souls that want to, no more conscious souls that want to occupy the space of a new need, and think of how many cells there are in a human embryo, how many atoms there are in DNA, a strand of DNA. Nobody wants to be the soul, the oversoul of every one of those strands. Most of them just work on programming. Within the human body, the oversouls of the larger organs, sometimes they will have a more conscious soul that want to occupy them. And when those more conscious souls become very vocal, they can seem like you have multiple personalities. And effectively, that's what you have, is you've got a different soul with a very unique point of view, not just a program to follow orders, but a mind of its own. And this happens with the brain, it happens with the heart, it happens with all the major lungs. And when they differ, their preferences differ, with the oversoul, the human oversoul of the human body, this is what causes all kinds of illness and disease. A mismatch, spiritual mismatch between the organs. That causes the whole soul vehicle to be weaker, to be more susceptible to invaders, more susceptible to mistakes in programming that cause defects. Replication defects in DNA makes one more susceptible to mutations, etc., etc. Okay, so basically, what I'm telling you is that the female inclined souls tend to have come from the lineage of either Karma or Lilith. So women tend to be more Lilith-oriented. Lilith is more of the child woman. The woman that wants to look beautiful, the woman that doesn't want to age, the woman that doesn't want to take responsibility, wants an easy life, just wants somebody to take care of them and handle everything, and wants kids, but has a perfect idea of what they want the kids to be, and is always disappointed in the kids because she's not willing to put in enough effort, at least not the right kind of effort, to raise a good kid. The karma woman are the ones that may not be the most flashy, they may not take the most risks, but they're good, solid women who have a sense of balance, a sense of judgment. And this is the challenge for men looking for a mate. Liliths tend to be more exciting. Karma women tend to be not so exciting, but better long-term partners. And it's very difficult to find a woman that has both. You have to basically find women who have a mixture of lineage that balances these things. Now, of course, once sex was added to the picture, these are soul characteristics here. Lucifer had daughters, God had daughters and sons. And so the incarnations of God had daughters and sons. The incarnations of Lucifer had daughters and sons, which mixed with the others. And, this basically homogenizes us all into pretty distinct archetypes. This is what Jung's work was all about, is kind of defining the archetypes of human behavior and trying to sort out why there was so much variability, what were some of the strongest archetypes, and how you could identify people that were sort of dominated by that archetype. And it is possible to find people that are more pure one or the other, or one particular archetype or personality. In fact, you can kind of think of Borg influence creating an anti-archetype to all of these others. That's the job of the adversary, is kind of make things difficult. Why do we have to have things difficult? Well, if things came easily, you wouldn't learn anything. All of this effort that we put into modern education, making it easy to learn, using computers and using visual techniques and better textbooks and this and that, actually have hurt education. 100 years ago, education was much more diverse. Wider range of sources. The teachers chose what they wanted to teach based upon cultural norms, but also based on their personal preferences. And this created a much more diverse culture than we have now. What we're creating now, with especially since authoritarian control of internet and media, that is worse in some countries than others, but is pretty much affecting all countries at this point, whether they are dominated by the five big media corporations, or whether the news is dominated by state media. We're becoming very programmed, very monoculture programmed by what's left of any diversity in media. And it's very obvious. People are becoming much less diverse culturally, much less diverse mentally. And I don't know if you're like me, that have seen and interacted with, well, let's see, counting my grandparents and my kids, and I've been fortunate enough to have 3 wives of different generations, and children of 3 different generations. I can definitely tell you there is a pattern. I've basically seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations in action, at least for some of their lifetimes. And this is a pattern that you could observe if you had my experience. There has definitely been the same pattern that shows up in globalization, in fact, in our economies, in our governments. They're becoming monocultural. And this is not a good thing. Monolithic culture, monolithic economy, monolithic government is really, really bad. It's very brittle. It's not diverse. And this is the big lie of diversity, is that these diversity programs are actually making us less diverse. They are creating false narratives, false identities of diversity that are actually magnifying differences, prejudices that largely don't exist anymore, recreating, moving backward. Neo-racism is becoming worse than racism. Neo-feminism is worse than chauvinism. Much more toxic. And globalism is much, much worse than the new form of globalism with New World Order globalism is much worse than the Old World Order globalism. The Old World Order being based upon religious leaders who sort of directed the nobility of that area. So Catholicism, Orthodoxy, all of the other major religions, Buddhism, etc., they all had the same basic idea of being a spiritual meritocracy that sort of had, at least in theory, some influence over the secular authority and could encourage their behavior to be more in line with the ideals of their religion. And all religions tend to be built upon some very basic ideals, one of which is the Golden Rule, which is basically the honor system of karma. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's a good general law of behavior when you're dealing with somebody that you don't know. Somebody that's maybe not at your same level of consciousness, somebody that's not the same cultural background. At least try to treat them as well as you would be treated. Now that doesn't always work, obviously. If you encounter a culture who interact with other cultures by exchanging young women for sex or sacrifice, they're going to be disappointed in that exchange when you don't offer up your, the daughters of your least valuable members or something like that. So there are mismatches in the Golden Rule. That doesn't make the Golden Rule something bad. Now, there are many people out there now that are saying, well, the Golden Rule is a bunch of shit. Because it doesn't work. Well, there's a lot of things that don't quite work. You don't throw anything that's working, sort of, until you got a better idea. And this is the really idiocy of cult Marxism. Cultural Marxism turns into cult Marxism when your idea of perfection, based upon your narrow view of who is oppressed and who is the oppressor, comes to be your most important driver. And everything becomes about, how can I turn this information into an agenda that serves my purpose? And especially in the realm of history, historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, etc., have come to basically gravitate towards approaching their theories, approaching their critical thinking from a standpoint of what's consistent with my political cult. If I'm an arch feminist, I'm looking for anything, any story that I can tie the archaeological evidence to something related to the battle of the sexes. And, a lot of that is, a lot of the mythology there is, there was a time where societies were run by women, and it was so much better. We didn't have war. We blah 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 blah, and they have this whole mythology built around a time of the top leaders being women. Now there were definitely societies like that. We have literary evidence of that, and some physical evidence. However, there's not enough to justify that very cult Marxist interpretation. Similarly, there are other folks in those professions who are basically cult motivated by the narrative of East versus West, or colonialism versus European colonialism versus the perfection of indigenous cultures. And anything that basically is not Western becomes indigenous by definition, which is silly because these numpties don't realize that the first colonial empire was arguably either the Mongols or the Chinese, or maybe even the Islamic Sultanate, in terms of the influence, the cultural influence that they had, and their active, sending expeditions out to explore places that they could exploit. I'm in a place that was very exploited through many of these phases, Indonesia. Now, Indonesia started out as probably one of the cradles of civilization. In fact, it is my firm belief that Indonesia is the site of the original Garden of Eden. The original tree that the first fruit of knowledge came from. What tree was that? I don't know, because that was a tree from the time when the trees were the chosen species. Plants were the chosen species, not humans, not animals, not any of the ones that came later. This game's been going on for a long time. And we still have intelligent plants around right now. They're just kind of stealthy about it because they're pretty experienced in the ways of chosen species, and how the new species have a tendency to fear the old ones and want to destroy them, which is how we ended up not having Anunnaki here, not having Nephilim, not having Elohim on this planet anymore. The kids often banish or imprison or destroy the parents to gain power, which ties back to this desire, right? That I told you is programmed into all souls. It's part of what's driving creation. Anyway, so if you look just in Indonesia, so it's been colonized and recolonized and conquered probably more than any other place on the planet. Just in living memory, it was made part of the Buddhist world, the Hindu world, became part of the Buddhist world, and then became part of the Muslim world. And then later waves of conquerors came and introduced Christianity and mercantilism. The Dutch were actually probably less interested in religion and more interested in mammon, more worshippers of mammon than God, if you got right down to it. And there was also the influence of the Spanish and Portuguese that didn't deeply touch, but were in the area having some effect, and the English. So, to lay the blame for oppression on the West, on Europe, on the US is just insane, an insane bit of cultural Marxism. that many, many professionals have ingrained so deeply that when all you have is a hammer and a sickle, everything looks like something that needs to be cut down or something needs to be bashed. And this is the essence of communism. This is the essence of communism in its mature state as cult Marxism. It's a very dangerous thing, and that's why I speak out so strongly against that particular fake religion. And that's exactly what it is. They claim to be atheist, but in fact they worship the absence of religion, the absence of God, the absence of any control but their own ideology. So effectively, they make communism their God. They make the party their God. They make the party leader their God. And if you've ever spent much time in China, or you knew the Soviet Union before it dissociated, or you've been to any of the other little, banana republic communist countries like Cuba, Venezuela, which I have. I spent many years in China. I spent time in Russia after the end of the Soviet Union when there was still a lot of evidence of it and a lot of people who had a memory of that time. I've been to Cuba. The pattern of communism is absolutely the same every time. It is not a populist religion. It advertises that, and that's the way they get useful idiots to follow. Oh, socialism would be so good if we could just have the perfect government that worked for the people. Well, let me tell you, governments don't work for the people. The people have to force the government to work for them. And that's what is the problem of democracy. If the people have all the power, they just demand silly things that are unreasonable. Oh, let's just divide up all the money amongst everybody. Or let's steal money from the rich. This is what happened in the French Revolution. They went too far down the idea of democracy, and basically whoever could gain enough folks to follow them would go out every night and say, who are we going to lynch today and take all their property and blah, 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 blah. It was total chaos. And this is coming to countries that are under this stupid idea of democracy is perfect. No, it's not. That's why we have republics. Democracies don't work. Republics are different. They are constitutional democracies that have laws that are designed to protect everybody, even if they're not the most powerful, even if they're not the largest group, even if everybody votes for giving away or lynching all the rich people. That's not a good thing to do. It tears the whole thing down. And revolutions are bad things. There is no revolution, and I'm including the American Revolution there too, even though it's probably the what people point to as the most successful revolution ever. Even that one had a lot of problems before it became half as healthy as the British government. And for a lot of history after that, the other countries of the Commonwealth actually had more healthy economies, politics, etc., than the U.S. More freedom, more equality than the U.S. The U.S., it had to come very hard. And it's absolutely because they started with a revolution. And the revolutionary leaders got to dictate things. Who were the leaders of the revolution in the U.S.? Well, Let's talk about George Washington. Oh, first president, such wonderful guy. Oh, we love George Washington. You know what? He was the richest landowner in the colonies. Little known fact, Alexander Hamilton. Well, in fact, he was the richest rentier of the colonies, the richest industrialist. He had a lot of connections with Europe and basically did a lot of money laundering. The forerunner of the banking system that controls everything and tells you how much money you can have and makes your money worth a little less each year through inflation. Oh, inflation's good for you. A little bit of inflation is good for the economy. How many times have you heard that bullshit? Inflation is basically taking your money and making it less valuable by people who have the ability to know ahead of time what's going to happen, and they can make money through that process. This is called, in general, arbitrage. Knowing enough about a system to be able to take advantage of it by manipulating different pockets of the system to guarantee that you're going to make money. This is how folks make money in the international currency market, and this is very important to what's going on now. So if you don't know what's going on with crypto, you haven't heard what's going on with digital currencies, you haven't tied it together with what's going on with social credit scores and health scores and health cards to go travel, vaccine verification, etc., well, then you need to go do a little education, because this is basically the way that Borg's team, the adherents of the machine that wants to control everything and manipulate everything and tell you what to see, how to see it, when to see it, and convince you that it's good for you. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. That's Borg talking, or a Borg servant, part of this collective that wants to run everything. That's what Borg is all about. It's about automating everything underneath you, dictating everything underneath you, and basically everybody wants to be the godfather, but they don't realize the godfather of this power universe is Borg. And many of the gods that we have worshipped, the many ways we have worshipped God, you weren't worshiping God, you were worshiping Borg. God is not a power seeker. God is not almighty. God is not omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. That's what Borg wants to be, through all of its eyes that it has assimilated, through all of its hive mind slaves. Anyway, so I think that hopefully will clarify some things that maybe people were having a hard time understanding if they've been following my channel. And if it's the first time you visited because the headline caught your attention, if you found it interesting and you want to know more, there's a ton of episodes behind this one where you can catch up. I'd advise you to go from this one, if this is your first time and you thought it was interesting, go to my very first episode, which introduces the philosophy/religion of omnism, which is the way that I basically came to what I'm teaching today. It is an evolving process. The only way you're going to get to absolute truth in anything is through evolution. You take in more information, you modify your message, if it doesn't quite explain that, and by integrating the observations of all of science and all of personal experience, spiritual experience, you can come up with a pretty good theory of everything. And that's what I try to do with my channel. Anyway, like, share, subscribe. If you like this episode, I wouldn't be averse to having a donation or getting some sponsors or building up a following that wants to help out in any way with this mission. I'm not going to use or abuse anybody. That's bad karma. And I won't allow anybody that gets involved with me to use or abuse others. So that might cut out most sponsors that might be interested in working with me. That and the fact that I'm already pretty heavily shadow banned because much of the truth I spread is not very popular with the folks that are spreading false narratives. And there are many false narratives being spread by folks that want to control, that want to be one of the godfathers or on the godfather team that wins this interesting conflict that we're in the middle of right now, which I guess you could call it World War III. It's been going for quite a while. In fact, it's been going pretty much without stop all the way through all the world wars and all the way back to the beginning of history. The godfathers, the godmothers change, the mafia families change, but the basic idea is that while God and other powerful spiritual entities were playing the game themselves, aware of karma, a lot of young and naive and dangerous souls were taking advantage of this and thinking, oh well, while God's away, while all the good guys are away, we'll just impersonate them and do a bunch of bad stuff. And most of the popes were like that. Most of the popes were bad guys that got to their position by power plays. Very few of them had a very noble intent in their representation of Western Christendom. Very few of the emperors of China had a noble intent of doing their Taoist or Confucianist or Buddhist duty toward the people that they ruled. This is the nature of cults. Cults are designed to exert power, to gain and keep power, which, that's why cult Marxism is really a cult. It is one of the cults. Cult capitalism is the same thing. If you think capitalism is perfect and free Marxists are absolutely perfect, you are blind to the fact that they get manipulated, they get controlled by bad people. It's inconsistent with human nature to think that a market could function without any kind of government, without any governance, without any regulation. Just as stupid as thinking that, well, if we just regulate and control everything, then everything will be perfect. It's a good way to shut everything down. If you make it too difficult to do anything, people just lay flat, which is a lot of what's been going on in China as the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, made their government more and more onerous to the people. People just decided, you know what, I can't have a life like this. I'm just going to sit around and have instant noodles and do the bare minimum to get by and play video games or disconnect watching what's the YouTube equivalent? Douyin or whatever, or the equivalent of TikTok, and try to become an influencer and make a lot of money that way. And those folks are getting a rude surprise as they start getting money. They become attention seekers, attention getting of the government, who is short on funds, and they're finding themselves suddenly being taxed of their entire income or separated from their life so somebody can conquer their income. which is a very frequent thing that happens in totalitarian governments. They can be very arbitrary. The folks in power can just say, oh, you need to be squashed, which is effectively what globalists in the West are doing to Elon Musk after he took over Twitter and started revealing a lot of the dirt about what they were doing to control and manipulate people through control of social media and control of streaming media, especially news, but also indoctrinainment. And if anybody who has been following what has been coming out of Hollywood over the last 100 years knows that it's becoming more and more indoctrination and less entertainment as it gets more and more woke. Which is essentially, wokeism is trying to regulate everything, and it ends up over-regulating everything. You can't say anything, do anything that's outside what they find is acceptable, what nobody will be offended by. And that goalpost is constantly shifting to the point where you can't be a comedian anymore. You can't make a joke. You can't make a good joke without offending somebody. So a lot of folks are just, you know what, I'm not going to do that. If I want to be a comedian, I guess I'm going to have to go create my own streaming channel or go on the road and do a stand-up routine and let my reputation speak for itself. And even there, you get people canceled from clubs because somebody, oh, I heard him doing his routine there. You can't have that guy here. The same is happening with all kinds of speakers, university campuses and whatnot. This is, basically what pulled Jordan Peterson out of the academic programming environment that he was in. In his core specialty, he is still very dogmatic about what he says in relation to clinical psychology. And I have a lot of differences with him based on my spiritual understanding. But he's gradually coming around and now understands that at least religion is something that has useful archetypes, models, for dealing with human psychology. So, maybe he's getting to where he can progress beyond the Jung idea of everything just being an archetype or like a pattern, basically, and coming to understand that those patterns have a deeper meaning. Those patterns got created for a reason. Those patterns were actually the result of a creation that if you logically step back and look at what we know of our history, what we have recorded, compare it to other cultures, other civilizations, what they've recorded, you can actually extract a fairly coherent narrative, which is what I do. Okay, I'm rambling on. Like, share, subscribe, help out if you like. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on the Omnist Hour. I'm Rob Trump, signing out. Happy Karma.